from whence you came, Peter. What were you trained in? How are you assessing and treating these people with this chronic low back pain before?
Yeah, so I grew up in New Zealand actually, and I trained in Otago University in Dunedin, which is the south of New Zealand. And a number of pretty notable people have come from that part of the world who've gone into, being names in physiotherapy. I suppose my background then, that was in the 80s. So there was very little understanding of pain back then. And so the predominant models of understanding were the McKenzie method. There was a smattering of, I think manipulative therapy was quite a big thing back then. There was some discussion around muscle imbalances. It was very biomedical, very pathoanatomical, very biomechanically orientated or impairment orientated in terms of my perspective. Mm-hmm. When I graduated, I worked both in a hospital and then a private practice setting, and I did every workshop I could get my hands on. So I did all the McKenzie workshops. I did training under, manual therapy, manipulative therapy. I just got my hands on anything I could get my hands on. And I at that point, I felt like I was a jack of all trades and a master of nothing. I was treating patients with pain. I was using, Mulligan techniques, McKenzie approaches, manual therapy, combination of stuff. And I really felt like I was running blind. So I realized that I needed to make a shift and I was not sure which way to go. And a colleague of mine had said that the postgraduate training programs in Australia were very well regarded. And so I ended up going to Perth, Western Australia, working under a man called Bob Elvey, who was the main teacher back then, who developed a whole lot of work around the brachial plexus provocation tests. Fantastic therapist. And Bob was really going through a transformation himself. He had trained originally under Syriacs, Maitland, strongly manual therapy orientated, fabulous handling techniques, but he was really seeing this emergence of pain science, of understanding the biopsychosocial influence around pain. And that kind of shifted my trajectory. So after that, I worked in a pain clinic where we were dealing with people who were extraordinarily disabled, like in a wheelchair, morphine pumps, like where my techniques had no role to play at all. Like couldn't even touch these people, let alone think of manipulating them, highly sensitized, distressed, disabled human beings. And then the other part of my time was in a private practice setting where people would come in with aches and pains and I could manipulate them, stretch them, push them, nudge them, mobilize them, and they were happy. And there was these two extremes sat in polar opposite positions where it's like my handling, my hands-on skills seemed to work in one group and were completely unable to be effective in another group. And it kind of gave me this broader perspective on the problem, I think. Around that time, I also became very aware of the complete lack of evidence for anything that we had in our profession. There were very few trials that had tested the efficacy of anything. So I was really interested in clinical research, which is really in its infancy back in that time. And that took me on my research journey. So I'd done my undergrad program. I trained in manipulative therapy, predominantly manual therapy. That was a one-year postgraduate training program. I'd worked for 3 years and then I embarked on my research career. And at that point in time, again, my perspective was very, very impairment orientated, pathoanatomically, talking about instability and muscle balance and local global muscle systems and motor control. I was in that world. And I suppose that was, I finished my PhD in 98. And that process took me into another place, which then has evolved into a much broader understanding of pain and realizing that, our simplistic understandings of pain just don't hold up to the evidence. And they don't really meet the need of a lot of the patients that we deal with. That's a really quick snapshot of my journey.
Yeah, quite difficult to fit in that many years, right? In just a few seconds.
Hear the entire episode for free on iTunes, Spotify, other favorite podcast players, or go to mechanicalcareforum.com.